perhaps Sharon, now that you have heard some top tips from Fatou and from Laura's experience at Microsoft, can you perhaps give us some ideas of how organizations could introduce these recommendations or tips into their own actions, practices, policies?
Yeah, and thank you both for all of that really fantastic insight. I'd say so I have these three segmented thematic areas that have, I think, emerged from both Fatou and Laura. But I will say first and foremost, something to bear in mind. One, chances are there are already neurodivergent folks in your workplace. But again, that process of self-identification and accommodation seeking is a very wrought theme and should be considered otherwise. So the idea of what do we do in order to attract talent should be more, what do we need to do as a baseline to begin? The second thing I also want to mention is often when you solve for, so exactly what Fatou and Laura mentioned, when you solve for, let's say, folks who are autistic or folks who have ADHD, you are definitely solving for them, but you are also solving for the most vulnerable people across the board. Because when you have a challenge, it is a challenge for everyone, but it is compounded when you are part of any marginalized group. So that being said, I noticed these three things that emerged from everything that Fatou said and also Laura validated, which is communications, flexibility, and fit. So in thinking about communications, Fatou said something very, very critical here, which is around non-ambiguity. We are fortunate enough on our team to do a lot of research alongside the work we do and alongside the people we work with. And one of the things that we've seen over and over again is something that comes hand in hand with inequity is ambiguity, especially in places that you would not even know. For instance, what we've learned from some small research samples that have emerged is that, for instance, with performance management, if your performance management systems, the ways of assessing people are unclear and ambiguous, this is going to be most detrimental for women, new immigrants, and neurodivergent folks. And that is because you are essentially asking someone to depend on cultural information and cultural norms within an in-group that they are not part of. And so they're having to go through this guessing game. And for, these three groups of people, and I imagine more, it becomes a huge barrier to being able to come with your full talents and skills, but also just a huge barrier to actually just coming in the door. And so I think from an application point of view, it becomes really, really important to audit your existing ways around communication. What is clear, what is not clear, what is built into process, and what is assumed. I'll give you an example. Laura talked really excellently around the interview process. Something as simple as building it into a process. So not a matter of, individual decision by decision, but building it into process that when you are about to have an interview, send over your questions in advance. That's simple. That means that there is no ambiguity in what a person is coming in to that process into, letting them know what questions you're going to ask, who is going to be there, and what kind of what position they'll be playing should you be successful. So to say, like, Bob will be there, and they will be, if you are successful, they would be your immediate supervisor, things of that nature. Something that we've also implemented for clients in the past is one thing that I find really exciting, but a lot of people are terrified, is within the interview process, adding a portion that basically allows for a candidate to interview you. Again, we need to remember that a big part of equity is autonomy. And so the autonomy to make a decision about, is this the place I should be working? And even more importantly, for instance, if that re-interviewing is for them interviewing who would be their direct supervisor, understanding, does this person have the capacity and the empathy to be able to understand how I will need to work? Them being able to ask, how do you feel about something as simple even here as when we are meeting, I never have my camera on. And if they say, oh, well, that's a sign of disinterest, I don't know if you're really listening, then that gives the person the autonomy to say, this is, regardless of all of the wonderful things they've mentioned about benefits and accommodation, this is maybe not the kind of place that I need to work. Or even make the decision, okay, I think although this person is not quite where they need to be, they are showing enough willingness to work with me. So perhaps this is a chance I can take. Again, autonomy. And there's flexibility and fit. And again, building that into process as much as possible. So you'd be able to say, like Fatu said, we are building it into process that we have especially now, as we've seen in the last 3 years, have a more flexible remote work and also office work policies that, like Laura said, we have spaces both for co-working but also for private work, that we have policies against scent, not coming in with perfumes and things of that nature, ensuring that, for instance, if you're working in a physical office, something very simple as your soaps are not scented, the soaps that you buy for shared bathrooms are not scented, things of that nature. And again, that requires, and this may come from us at QuakeLab, we use a lot of, like Virginie said, design thinking, systems thinking, and also results-based management, where a really, really good tool is journey mapping. Think of a person's journey from the moment they engage with you until, some point that you decide. And just think about all of the ways in which they will need support or that they are faced with barriers. And consider this, like I mentioned at the top of my response, assume that there are neurodivergent folks in your workplace. And with that assumption, also assume that the fact that they're there means that they have had to navigate an incredible amount of barriers to be here. So do not think of that as we are where we need to be, but think about what are all of the barriers that they had to navigate to be here. Think of them as the sort of the ones who have been able to manage going through all of that, and that they do not need to. The next person doesn't need to have to go through these barriers. And what are the ways in which you can systemically and really intentionally solve for that, both identify them and solve for them? Thank you.